Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio, audio, no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of businesses or even whole industries that go from being insanely successful very quickly, go to being bankrupt, gone completely, or if they do exist in relatively minuscule sort of proportions to what they once were, the shadows of their former selves. This is something I've wanted for quite a while now, to do a video series of why businesses and industries fail and look at the causes and how it came about. And having worked in business and still involved in business over many years, and having been at the apex, CEO and EVP and all that sort of stuff, I'm sort of got a good front row seat for understanding this and describing it, and having been in a position of having had to make decisions in businesses that are struggling and that sort of thing. Unlike, say, the business journalist for, I don't know, the business magazine that has never worked a day in their lives in a business. Let me know in the comments below whether there's any interest in this from people, and I'll do a full video series with pictures and movies and all that sort of stuff. But for the moment, I'll just kick off with this. I'll go on a couple of things. There was recently and I won't mention the name. There's recently like a fast food or a restaurant chain in the United States that's filed for bankruptcy, or Chapter 11, as they call it in the United States. And so they would seem on the face of it to have been at least very successful. A lot of restaurants around around the United States, and they look quite nice. They're well kitted out and so on. But that they've gone to Chapter 11, and it seems insane. Now, what's the problem there? Is it now? It always comes back to bad management decisions. Either they made the wrong decision, or when they did react to challenges, it was too late and not enough. Or so it's related to decisions and the ability of the management group, board of directors, executive management, to actually be on the same page, agree on a response to challenging conditions and circumstances. Now, challenging conditions and circumstances don't creep up on you in 5 minutes. They accumulate over time. They may be insidious, as in it sort of happens without you knowing, because it happens too slowly and incrementally for it to sort of stick out in a dramatic way. So sometimes it's hard to spot a trend that's occurring unless it's really hitting the numbers. Because if it's hitting the numbers, you see it. But if it's more incremental and lots of different influences coming from all different directions, it's much harder to see. Only experienced, capable management can respond to that sort of thing. And there's not much of that around. And there's the quality of management today has probably never been lower than it is. All these affirmative action flunkies and the finance companies wanting to appoint their useless stooge flunky buddies into positions, and management by checklist and so on. So there's even software, guys I know as an executive managers, it's all run by site. They buy a bit of software off the shelf and they just go off that checklist, and that's how they do everything. There's no managerial decisions at all. They just go through the checklist. They just got the buddies in the right place, and they've never achieved, accomplished, produced, or built anything in their lives. Not every single manager's like that, by the way, but there's more now than there would be. And if you see failures that just seem inexplicable, so well, this is a booming industry, how the fuck could you fail, and that sort of thing, then now I'll sort of go back to, say, the British motor industry that no longer exists. It's been 100% obliterated. Whatever British, original British marks, brands, still exist, are owned by offshore, organisations. So there's no British. This is in motor vehicles. There's no British brand that's still owned by British managers or interests or investors or anything like that, which is insane. But But there you go. Now the British were very much at the forefront of a lot of what was happening in the automotive space from the very early days. And in the early 1950s, Britain was one of the biggest manufacturers and exporters of motor vehicles in the world. They were second, always always in the top three. And even at times, there were a few years in the late 40s and early 50s when British exports of motor vehicles, they were the number one motor vehicle exporter. It seems unbelievable today, but that's the fantastic position they saw themselves in or found themselves in. And yet within 25 years, almost the entire industry was gone. So you thought, hey, how can that happen? You're sort of number one, number two in the world, and then 25 years later, it's all gone. I mean, fuck. There are various reasons for that, and as with all things, it's not just one push button. It was that caused it. You can always take it back to managerial decisions. So if you want to sort of lay the blame anywhere, it's again the inability of management to respond usefully or in a timely manner, or by the time they realise the problem, it's too late. The horse has bolted, that type of thing. But it's not that easy when you are a CEO or an EVP or something like that in a business or an industry or a company that's lost its way and gone off the rails. There are various factors that contribute to going off the rails. There's all sorts of cronyism and endless things like that. And this makes it very difficult to unwind. When you've got deeply entrenched cronyism, people are very reluctant to let go of their benefits and very reluctant to let go of their friends and their relatives and their mistresses and their concubines. And they'll hang on to the bitter end, even though they will concede that there's a big danger. They assume that you can get out of the danger by, and I've sat at meetings with the board of directors who are all themselves, wealthy socialite cronies that have never done a day of work in their fucking lives. And they've got this super absurd, simplistic view of things. And so when you say, well, these people have to go, well, no, that's my best buddy, and this is my my uncle's daughter, or so, and they've got relatives, friends, and mistresses, and all sorts of intricate webs of social relationships that they give that the priority. And so I've been at meetings where the chairman of the board will say, well, I don't know what the problem is, Billy Bob. You're worrying about this. Why don't you just go out and sell more? Then there'll be no more problems. Just go out and sell more. There's no more problem, and this sort of thing. So absurdly simplistic. Just increase sales, and then that's it. These things don't matter. So, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But in the case of the British motor industry, they were in a perfect position to be number one. They were many of the advanced economies in the world, other than the United States, but many of the advanced economies in Europe, their industries had been knocked about very badly by the Second World War. So the British car industry had a very artificial sort of set of customers that were only going to be there temporarily anyway, and so this was sort of an important consideration that they would lose that within a few years. They also had a number of export markets like Australia and South Africa and Canada and so on, where the British were able to sell their cars to, if you like, former colonies, the Commonwealth and so on, which also gave them quite an artificial boost. Now, those countries started to introduce tariffs to protect local industries, which means that the British motor industry would open up a manufacturing office or branch in, for example, Australia, and so they could still sell their brand, but it wasn't being exported out of Britain. So all the stuff was being then manufactured in Australia. So they were going to lose their markets to, or lose some of their markets to a revitalizing, German and French and so on, Italian, and so rebuilding motor vehicle industry, and also places where they were able to sell cars to the peripheral countries, like in, I don't know, Denmark or something. in Europe, they were going to lose those, as well as when German industry came back online, that the Germans would sell BMWs and Mercs and VWs and so on to these places. So the British were going to lose that also. Now, in terms of the domestic market, they had some protections there, so they could have focused on that. So at this stage, they were able to sell pretty ordinary vehicles really to captive markets, but they were going to lose that edge as the 1950s went along. Now, if you're a manager at the top end of things there, you'd go, well, gee, we need to. The reality is we're going to lose all these customers. So if we're going to keep these customers, we have to produce a much better car, much better quality finish and workmanship, and a better price. We've got to modernize our equipment. We've really got to do some stuff here. But they actually didn't. Instead of doing that, going in that way, they actually started feather bedding. So the government would protect them and say, well, you just employ more people. So there's no incentive for them to modernize equipment and plants. So they had a job. We can modernize all the equipment we have, and that'll mean less workers, as in less hours needed to build each car. But if we create bigger markets for ourselves, that is better quality vehicles at a better price, then we'll have to produce more vehicles, which will then make sure there's buoyant levels of employment. Now, there are lots of smaller companies that increasingly are finding it hard to play at the international level. So the government thought, well, why don't we just combine these businesses into one sort of large motor group like British Motor Corporation, and then that will give them the economies of scale to say, where this company that makes a good engine and this company makes a good body, this one makes good suspension, and that one makes so different companies doing different things, or having a presence in different markets, different levels of quality of finish, these sorts of things, that you can combine all that and realize considerable economies, which will reduce the cost of manufacture. In a theoretical sense, that was a fair enough sort of way of looking at things. It would have technically, at least, would have worked. But instead of that, each brand was very much a fiefdom, and they all had their political connections. They all had their buddies in the senior levels of business and banking and politics. So they were all able to argue that why should they give up their sovereignty and their little fiefdom for the common good? Why don't the other guys give it up? Why should I give up? And so on. So there's a lot of that, and the central management was never strong enough to be able to oppose that view and those attitudes. And you can call it selfish and short-sighted. You can call it a whole lot of things, but it came down to petty human behaviour in many ways. Then the government decided to nationalise the car industry, and again, not necessarily a bad decision in itself. And they invested, in today's money, invested billions upon billions of dollars to help them succeed. But that money was all squandered, and the opportunities were squandered, and really it accelerated the downfall rather than the salvation of the car industry. Now, once politics gets involved, then there are a lot of people who are very influential. They know they're politicians. They've got buddies in the senior public service, and people who couldn't manage a fucking brothel, and yet they'll lobby their buddies to say, well, "Why don't you make me the CEO of that company? I'm a good. I went to the right Ivy League schools, and that sort of thing." And so they were putting these people, or people maybe who were great design engineers for motor vehicles, the car engines, great design engineers, and say, well, you know about cars, so we'll make you the CEO, we'll make you a senior executive. Now, just because someone can design a good engine, and you do need that, by the way, just because someone designed a great engine doesn't mean that they can run a bath, let alone a business. So a lot of bad decisions made. The politicians being lobbied to appoint their friends and their flunkies and their buddies and people who appeared to be amenable to the political agenda. On top of that, the government would then and this is where politicising, is a real danger. The government would say, well, gee, we've got some high unemployment over in this area. I know what we'll do. We'll get the British Motor Corporation to build a factory there, which is going to employ 500 people. Problem solved. We'll win the election. We can go over that area and announce factory's going to be opened here. We're going to look after you. So there was a ridiculous amount, in my view at least, a ridiculous amount of politicising of where the jobs would be, how many jobs would be, or the company get leaned on and say, look, you've got a big factory in that area and unemployment's getting to be a problem. We want you to employ another 500 people. Okay. Well, hey, we're subsidising, we're throwing fuckloads of money at you. So just do what the fuck we want. Don't argue. You want that money or not? Hey, there's a knighthood in this for you if you'll do as you're told, and so on. So the politicising made the company really responding to political pressures and cronyism and feather bedding and all sorts of things when they should have been concentrating on making good quality cars at a good price. Now, then they came under pressure to produce a people's car at an affordable price that the British working man could afford. So and it had to be decent and attractive enough and good enough that so they produced this is like the Mini when it came out, and that there was a real thing around the world. So the Renault were doing a people's car, and the VW was being because it had bad third right connotations, but the VW was being redone in Germany as a cheap people's car, and around just generally around. I'm trying to think of other vehicles. Fiat had a people's car, so the British government really wanted a response from Britain. So that was where the original Mini Minor came out. I think that was like an 800 or 900 cc engine. But it was a small car. It weighed, I think, less than 600 kilograms. So the Mini was born. Now the trouble with the Mini was they were sort of under political pressure to sell it at an under £500 sterling, British pounds, less than $1,000 for the car, and they couldn't do it for that. So it cost them. For example, it cost them $1,000 to make the car. That's base ex-factory cost. But they sold it for $950 at the dealer. Now the dealer has to make their money out of the exercise. So if you like, the factory was selling. If you look at the complete transaction from out of the factory to the dealer, if you look at that, there's it was being sold at well below total cost when you add in, say, promotion and things like that. So they were taking actually quite a heavy hit on each one of these cars. And so the Mini was very successful, sold loads. It was kind of cute and sexy and everything, back in its day. And still is now. It still has a bit of cuteness about it even today. So, and there are various iterations on that. The Mini Cooper and a racing version was made and so on. But just for the family car thing, the Mini was a huge loss leader. They lost a fuckload of money out of making and selling the Mini, and they had no other brands that were making it up. So as cost pressures mounted, the government was pouring more money into it, which was wasted. This went on employing expensive consultants and all sorts of people who again were related to the power, sort of the political power machine as well. Why don't you employ our buddies there to go and do this or help you with that? And vast sums of money were thrown at utterly, totally wasteful, ridiculous projects that made no sense at all. And yet they were pursued with expensive vigor. So a lot of money wasted. And if you listen to the management that's being interviewed, and these were interviews that were happening in the 1960s. If you listen to management being interviewed, it's obvious. Just looking at them and listening to them, I wouldn't employ any of them to sweep the floor, let alone run a fucking business. But also there were very militant unions that were treating, as indeed the political class was, that were treating the motor industry as this endless gravy train that would just keep on giving and would cost nothing, and no one had to really worry about it. It was just a fountain that sprouted gold endlessly. And you listen to these managers and they're hopeless, but the unions made their contribution. Yeah, there were things like, say, in one factory there was a stoppage because the workers claimed that they could smell. There were cats, stray cats that somehow got in, and they could smell cat urine, and they found cat feces, things like that. Now, this is an example of just sheer stupidity. It irritates me looking at it even now. Uh, the, um, the union employee said, "Look, can you get cleaners in to and pest exterminators to get rid of the stray cats and to clean up the cat urine and the feces?" So that's not an unreasonable request, but the management decided they were going to have a showdown over it. We're going to show those fucking workers. Now there were a lot of petty strikes, so this may have been a last straw, and the local manager thought, "Yeah, well, I'm not going to do it." But it was a reasonable request, or at least it wasn't unreasonable. So the management told, as does the articles that you can still see read, management told the shop floor workers, "No, get fucked. We're not going to do this, or we'll do it when the fuck we're ready." So the workers threaten the strike. So it gets all heated, and everyone's making threats and so on. So the management then fold and say, "Okay, we'll get the cleaners in," which they should have done straight away. This was not it shouldn't have been a struggle for power over this. So then the cleaners come in, but the management then says that they want to do the cleaning during working hours. They're not going to do it on the weekend. They're not going to do it before the shift starts. They're not going to do it after the shift starts. They want to do it during working hours, and it's going to take, for example, half an hour, and the workers will be docked half an hour's pay because they can't work because the cleaners are there. The workers, not unreasonably said, "Well, why can't you do it out of working hours?" "No, because we have to pay extra for the cleaners, and so we'd rather stop the whole factory for half an hour than pay the cleaners a bit extra to clean." And I'm looking at this thing, you've got to be kidding. I mean, what manager would be this insane? This is deliberately being provocative and deliberately being difficult. Not that the unions were easy to get on with, they weren't, but this is deliberately provocative, and it's like they're spoiling for a fight. We're going to have the last word here, and if we concede anything to you, we'll get all snide and spiteful in return. That type of attitude. So anyway, the cleaners left a lot of water on the floor, so it was a danger, like a health hazard thing. And so the workers said, "Well, can you get the cleaners to dry the floor, dry mop it or something like that?" No, we're not paying any more for cleaners. So the worker said, "Well, there's too much water on the floor. We're slipping on the floor, so we'll stop. We don't want to go on the floor till it's dry." "Oh, well, we're going to dock you more pay then." Next thing it goes in, turns into a full-on blown strike. The whole factory goes out. There's endless insults being hurled and threats made and people being jostled and this all over what was just, can you clean up the cat urine and cat feces of the stray cat? That's it. And that was a stoppage of several days. And there were numerous work stoppages and strikes over these petty little things. Again, not that the unions were that easy to get on with, they weren't, but the management didn't seem to understand. It's like they couldn't see the bigger picture. They just wanted to try and provoke a confrontation so they could acquire some sort of moral superiority in the interaction. It was insane watching it. It's like children. Now, the senior management, like as in the CEO and the senior level management, they love to point out to, well, the British motor industry in 1 year had 100 or more than 100, actually it's quite, I think it was a few hundred work stoppages in 1 year. There you go. See, it's the union's fault, not us. We didn't do it. And yet, if you look at, say, in the German and even the French, and the French unions were quite militant, they had nowhere near that amount of stoppages or strikes. In some cases, the Germans could go for a whole year without a single strike. Now, why wasn't that sort of cooperation possible in Britain? The other thing that was pointed to, well, the British wages were too high. Well, that's not true either, because by the early 1960s, particularly the mid 1960s, German wages were just as high, if not higher. Same in France, and yet they could produce cars, Germans in particular. So what was it? And the British industry was simply unable to produce quality cars. The quality of some of the electrics, the desire to cut costs in the wrong places meant that the quality of some of the electrics in the more expensive vehicles, even Jaguars and so on, meant that you had a very poor quality car that was constantly breaking down. There was no quality control. It was just ridiculous. Poor quality product that was overpriced. And they just rapidly lost overseas markets as soon as the customers had an option to buy something else. They did. And the only thing the British could sell in quantity was the Mini, which they were losing money on every one. So in the end, the whole thing collapsed. Now, there were those that when you have a look at certain car designs and things that they were producing, you can see they were ahead of their time conceptually, but the execution was diabolical. And endless silly decisions, like one British car division would acquire the rights to a good quality 6-cylinder engine, good quality, good price, and it could be used in numerous different models, and yet one division of a small division that could never be economically viable on its own would decide they were going to build their own engine. Which again, if they built a world-class kick-ass engine, you go, okay, all right, well, fine. But they didn't. They do a cost-cutting, half-assed cut and shut thing where they produce a crap engine that was always overheating, that never really worked properly, and they would spend millions on developing that engine, a lot of it mysteriously disappearing into the pockets of a whole lot of politically well-connected consultants. So you can see the wider recipe, yet no one was prepared to make the hard decisions. Nobody was prepared to, assuming they even saw it all, and I can't believe they missed it, but other priorities would come in, pleasing the politicians, pleasing their buddies. And you look at the people at the upper echelon, the upper management that were making these rubbish decisions or making bad decisions or not really making the proper decisions at all, then they would all go on to, as soon as it all folded and collapsed and it was all crashing and burning, they would just simply move to other, because they were socially well connected. So they would just simply move to other well-paid jobs. They didn't suffer at all. They suffered nothing. Their prestige wasn't affected. They would just go straight in, or they would have golden parachutes that were so big they didn't need to work again. And they extracting vast sums from a dying industry. So coming back to my own experience here, so I'm hired into an organisation that's really struggling. They're on the ropes, and I nearly didn't take the job. If they hadn't pestered me to take it, I probably wouldn't have, because I thought, this is high risk. This place is going to fold. And but the board of directors was just made up of old money, wealthy socialites who were in it for the glory and the grandeur. It was a sexy new high-tech industry, and they wanted to be associated with it and have their name in the financial press and so on. They had no understanding of the business, how it worked, what was needed, and so because it was so sexy, and initially had been they'd gone out and bought vast segments of the market. They'd just gone out and sold things at below cost, and they developed a market base, but it wasn't profitable. But because money was being pumped into it on the basis of, once we've bought the market, we can then start to extract profits. But they never thought how this would be done. And when they realized that things were looking pretty pear-shaped, they decided they would hire someone to turn it around. But the board of directors made up of sort of different competing factions. They're all socialite groups, but all different competing factions. They all cancelled each other's candidate out, and then so a compromise candidate was sought, and that was where I came in. So I knew nobody. I was no one's friend. I was no one's relative. I didn't come from that so rich socialite end of town. So I was a complete outsider, which had its benefits in some way, but also its drawbacks. Because if you're not a social insider, you can never really be trusted in their view. You just don't quite have the right values and the right sort of take on things. So the decisions they made, or the people they hired, they just hired the friends and the relatives and the children and so on of the socialites that they knew. There wasn't anyone there who was hired on merit. And on top of that, the CEO had been in the United States for a while, came back with all these views on affirmative action, and you had to have a certain amount of black lesbians on staff, that sort of thing. So he came back with those sort of crazy views, and also the CEO stopped employee evaluations, so you couldn't sit down with your people that reported to you, so he asserted, the CEO, and say, well, this is where you're falling down, this is where you need to work harder, and this is where you need to develop your skills further, and so on. So he did away with all that, and had this crazy thing where people would assess each other. So you would assess the guy sitting next to you, and so people were cutting deals. Well, you say nice things about me, I'll say nice things about you. We both get a good evaluation, we can both get a pay rise. So so when I came in the door, the place was just thick with personal relationships, personal loyalties, relationships to the board of directors, to the socialite class. There were women employed there that would bend your ear about how there'd been Eve Saint-Laurent had a new charity event, and how she'd been invited to the opening night, or she'd been invited to the opening night of a new nightclub or a new restaurant, exclusive restaurant had opened up, and she'd been invited on the opening day of that. And they would tell you all these sort of things, and everything they talked about was to justify or to explain to me their social position. And so whenever I try and make them accountable for work performance, you're being paid a lot of money, can you actually do your job if you don't mind? They would sort of look at me as if, you silly little man, you silly little working class man. Do you know I've been to the opening night of the most prestigious nightclub in Australia, and you talk to me about work, and you talk to me about performance. I've been to the best restaurant in Sydney, and so that's how they'd respond. And so it was a very different world where no reality actually existed. They existed in this strange fantasy world of social reality, as in social status reality, and there was nobody who thought they should really do any work. And if they did work, they were doing you a favor by not even doing the work, but thinking about doing it, they were doing you a favor. So I found this very strange, because it wasn't something I was used to. And so I started to fire people that just point blank refused to do their job, point blank refused to turn up for work on time. But that wasn't easy, because they were well connected. So they would just make a phone call to the chairman of the board or something like that, and he would say, well, don't worry about Billy Bob. You just go back in the office, and I'll come in, and I'll come in soon, and I'll put Billy Bob in his place. So I'd have the chairman coming up to me and going, well, why are you firing Billy Jean there? Why are you worrying about that? Why aren't you going out and just trying to sell more things? Why don't you just? I came in last week. I came in, the chairman says, and I saw a salesman, one of the sales reps in the tea room, sitting down drinking coffee. Why isn't that salesman out selling? That's what we pay salesmen for. So don't you bother my friend. Don't you upset her. And who cares if she comes in at 11 o'clock in the morning who cares? You worry about the things that are important, and don't you upset my friend. So that you get those sort of things happening, and you can imagine the strained conversations that would happen in the regular meetings where I had to front the board and do State of the Nation sort of addresses to them. Pretty much all they do would be to attack me for upsetting their friends. They kind of didn't even want to know about the business, which I thought was strange. The person in charge of collecting debts, for example, making sure that the debtors creditors was being well organised. That person just point blank refused to even make a single phone call to chase up a debt, or to say, ask, well, you're on 30-day payment terms. Why are we now at 120 days? We still haven't seen, this sort of thing. And queries about mistakes in invoices that hadn't been corrected, which is why a lot of people weren't paying. Why were the invoices going out so incorrectly, labelled and so on? So the people there just plain wouldn't do it. They were too busy. The women in there were too busy filing nails, putting on makeup, and organising their social calendar. Why the fuck should they do any work? We're here for the prestige of it, not because we're going to do any work. Now, they were all aware that the company could go bust. They were all aware of that, and they would all accept that risk was a very real risk. So it's not like they didn't know, but they would argue that, well, okay, so what? Why doesn't everyone else give up their benefits? Why should I give up my benefits to help the company succeed? And by the way, I don't really care if the company succeeds or whether it folds or goes bust, because I'm very well connected and I can get another good job anytime I want to. And so all I got to do is make a few phone calls and I'll have a well-paid prestige job. So why should I worry about whether the company succeeds or fails? It's only a useful, it's nothing more than just like a window in a department store where I can look good. It's nothing more than that. I don't care. And so I found very difficult to make these people actually give a shit, even though they did concede and accept that the company could go bust. And many of them had their finger in the pie and all sorts of illicit benefits, illegal ones too, quite a bit of fraud going on. And so I would stop the fraud, and I'd have people, coming into my office saying, "Hey, Billy Bob, you've just stopped me from, helping myself to several $1,000s a month fraudulently. You have no right to do that. I have a right to break the law and steal." And they would actually sit there or stand there straight, irate that they had wives calling me up saying, "You can't do this. You're affecting our standard of living." And but no one actually cared, and so it was a huge struggle to not only make the decision. Now you get a certain level of decision fatigue, where I know if I go to correct something that's wrong, as in injurious to the business, if I go to correct something, I know I'm going to have a huge fight on my hands. I know that there are vast forces will be arrayed against me. I know that the chairman's going to try and chew me out. I know that the CEO might countermand any directive I give. So if I fire somebody, there's a decent chance or half a chance that he may rehire them, and which will then weaken my position as the EVP and so on. So this went round and round and round, and I thought, is it really worth it? Why am I going to bust my ass when there are just so many forces pushing against? And you get other things too, like some of the big customers that they had, the heavies, the senior executive management there would say, "Well, I want you to employ my mistress or my son or daughter or relative or cousin or niece, and I want you to give them a good job. You don't give them a job sweeping the fucking floors. I want them to have a prestigious job in a nice office overlooking the park." And with the veiled threat that if you don't do that, then we won't give you as much business or no business. So these sort of things, so you're constantly jostling the politics of it all. And it's also decisions made to cut costs. The CEO made a decision, well, why don't we get these components made in Taiwan? This was before Taiwan was turning out quality electrics. Why don't we get the stuff made in Taiwan? But the quality was much lower, and he was excited about the cost reduction in manufacturing. But because the quality was much lower, they once they were out in the field, they were breaking down, so that we had to have a huge maintenance crew, and the cost of maintenance and having to replace units in the field, this sort of thing, meant that it was actually far more expensive to have these lower quality things. But the CEO wouldn't budge, because as far as he was concerned, that cost reduction at manufacture, it didn't matter whether there were much higher peripheral costs. That to him was an achievement. So you're constantly having to fight these people and fight all sorts of people. just to do basics. Another example was we had a rather antiquated phone system that needed to be upgraded. Added more lines. We had to upgrade that, and it wasn't cheap. But the funds were needed, for Christ's sake. This is sort of in the very early stages of mobile phones, but or affordable mobile phones. So I'd ordered the new phone system to go in, but I'd also chewed out one of the socialite girlies for constantly going off on long lunches and not doing her job. So she spotted an opportunity to sort of get some payback. So she called the chairman and said, "Guess what? Billy Bob's just ordered $100,000 phone system. The company can't afford that. That's really expensive." So without knowing any of the details of why or how, or talking to me about it, the chairman countermanded the thing. But the thing was that the phone company had taken out the old phone system, and just as they were about to install the new one, he appeared and goes, "No, that's it. Stop. I'm not doing this." So like all the repair staff, the installation staff from the phone company, they go, "Oh, fine," and off they walked. So the company had no phones at all, and so I was, "What?" So I what? You're kidding me? And why would he do that and not talk to me? She was the girl who'd sort of set it up, was very smug and had this smirk on her face that, "Hey, I fixed you up." But it was very injurious to the company. The salespeople and the technical support people couldn't talk to the people they needed to without phones and so on. So the chairman appeared, and his argument was, "Well, why do we need telephones? The salesman should be out talking to people, on the road, and no one else should be talking to anybody. So why should we care? We don't need a phone." What? I mean, am I hearing this, you insane fuckwit? But these were the sort of things that went on, and this is why companies go bust. It's a collection of many things: bad decisions, unqualified people, and so on and so forth. But that's the front row seat. But I'd like to do a series on this, and let me know if you're interested in the comments below, and I'll get a few videos together. You've been with Tassos today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.